One thing that is pretty awesome about Marvel Snap is that the developers are not afraid to make changes. Whenever cards get overpowered, underpowered, there are a lot of changes in Marvel Snap. The timing maybe is a bit iffy, and sometimes what they actually do to the cards can be iffy, but putting all that aside, there are a lot of changes, frequent ones, and sometimes they even go back on changes that were previously made. So in this video, we're going to be looking at some nerfs that I think should be reverted, go back to their original state. Despite maybe them being broken in an old meta in the past, we're going to think maybe, with the current meta, because there's a lot of new cards, new decks that have flourished, maybe they wouldn't be so bad as they were today. And if you're wondering why would they ever do that, they made those nerfs for a reason. Why would they go back? Well, I'm not bashing the balance team. In fact, I actually love how they operate in the balance department with so many changes almost every single week, and just really giving love to some underperforming cards, nerfing some overpowering cards. But they have actually gone back on previous changes in the past, right? So a clear example is Dr. Doom. The bots used to be 4 power, right? And then they brought it back to 5. So it went 5, 4, 5. And we're back to Dr. Doom the way we know him. And it's a really fun card. I think a lot of the players were happy to see that nerf reverted. And that's what we're going to look at today. I got 5 cards plus a few bonus ones to cover that I think would be interesting, that would be fun. And here with Dr. Doom, they said in hindsight, the timing of our previous nerf to Dr. Doom wasn't ideal. We're confident Doom deserves at least a return to his former glory in order to compete, and he has. He's one of the best 6-drops in the game. So this is an example of what we're going to look at. Let's get to them. One of the coolest parts about this is probably a lot of nerfs or changes that you didn't even know about unless you were in the beta. So here we have July 19th, 2022. This was one of the first patches to ever drop on Marvel Snap. And guess what they did? They nerfed KA-ZAR. Isn't that crazy? KA-ZAR used to be a 4/4 giving +1 power to all the 1-cost cards. And I'm thinking we bring back KA-ZAR. I mean, why not go to a 4/5, right? Would that make a big difference? At the time, guys, 1-drops were insane. Everybody was basically in Series 1, maybe 2 at this point in time, because everyone just had fresh collections and it was a completely different Marvel Snap experience. All those Series 3 cards, etc., that weren't yet available. And in fact, Killmonger at this point in time was Series 3. He ended up dropping to Series 2 shortly after this change. So you can see how the 1-drops were absolutely popping off. Elektra was kind of the tech card option to counter these KA-ZAR decks and Blue Marvel and all the sorts. And, you had Nova, Carnage, these crazy combos. So they ended up nerfing them 4/4. It makes a lot of sense. It's not a huge difference. The card doesn't rely on its power. It's looking more so at the effect and then stacking that in today's meta with things like Mystique and Onslaught or whatever, and trying to get all your 1-drops to get buffed, maybe your Ultron strategy. I think it would be fine if he went back to being a 4/5. I don't think it would break anything, and it would be kind of fun to get a little bit more use out of this, a little bit more use out of your 1-drops. It'd be still tough with Killmonger, which I think is just kind of more fair to give this card more power because Killmonger exists. But hey, let me know in the comments below. Let's get to the next one. This one's going to be the spiciest one, okay? This is probably the most heavy-handed change, but believe it or not, OKOYE used to be a 1/1. And to add to this card has actually been changed numerous times. She used to, from the very beginning of Snap, give +2 power to all cards in your deck. I believe she was a 2/1 at that point in time. Then they ended up buffing her, changing her, I guess, because they dropped her power that she was giving to your deck to 1. But then they made her a 1/1. And let me tell you, when she was a 1/1, she was the best 1-drop in the game. Games basically came down to who played OKOYE first. On turn 1, turn 2, it doesn't really matter. If you play OKOYE first, your whole deck's going to get buffed. You're going to pop off. You're going to just out-tempo your opponent. Now, the reason I'm saying we can bring this one back to being a 1/1 with the +1 power, not the +2, the +1 power, is because I feel like the metagame has shifted enough that tempo just isn't as influential to the end game, right? Like if I can play OKOYE a turn earlier, I get +1 power to another draw. Maybe I draw a few more cards. Maybe there's a strategy where we're trying to cycle a bunch of cards out and we're just cheating them out like crazy with Jubilee, Lockjaw, whatever it needs to be. then maybe that ends up returning too much value. But I think we're pretty well okay. Maybe you can even go with a 1-0 if it's a little bit too much. But I think it'd be a lot of fun to bring this card back. I love this variant. This is one of my favorite variants in the game. And I hardly ever get to use it because I find a 2/2 OKOYE is just underwhelming, despite her synergizing with, quite a few cards like Dakin or Black Panther, these sorts of things. She just ends up kind of falling by the wayside. Just better options are present, so she doesn't get put into decks. I think a 1/1 would make her a very enticing option, especially since they changed Forge to be a 1/1 giving +2 power immediately. I think OKOYE being a 1/1 but you have to draw through your deck is a pretty neat change, and I think it'd be fun to see. But I will admit, this is probably the most powerful change that I have in this video. Next up is Destroyer. Now, Destroyer is a very interesting case, and he's not a bad card at 15 power. Okay, so this change isn't necessary. I think it's just kind of fun. I think we could bring him back to being 16 power. The reason he was nerfed, they do say Destroyer's making big waves. Lowering his power by 1 will give opponents more of a chance to win the location he's played to. Now, they made this change because at the time, there was a deck that was popping off that used a lot of ongoing cards, Professor X and Armor into one lane, even Warpath, just so that you had so much power there that you could just play Destroyer elsewhere and win that lane single-handedly. It was popping off because not a lot of players were Series 3 yet. They were just getting into Series 3, and if you got Destroyer early, you could build that deck. It was the only Series 3 card you needed to complete that deck and climb up the ranks. So it was more of a timing thing. The game had just released at the end of October. This is late November, a month and a half. People are starting to breach Series 3, and this card was just a little too strong for those new players. And now then, I think most of the player base, right, is, beyond Series 3, probably has a decent enough collection. You still have a trickle of new players coming in, but I think we're in a spot where you could probably bring Destroyer back to 16 power, and that deck that he was so strong in would not take off. It wouldn't get as good as it was, but maybe he'd find a new home. Maybe he'd be better in those destroy lists or something along those lines. Or even if that deck did come back a little bit, then that wouldn't be the worst thing. I think we have more counters, we have more options to work against that list in today's meta. Not to mention Destroyer is just such a badass card. Like, this guy's just so cool. I kind of miss using it more often. I actually have gotten to Infinite with this card a few times in the last 3-4 months, using more of a control style list. So it's still a good card. And if they didn't make this change, it'd be fine. But when I'm looking back at all the past nerfs, I feel like this is one that would be fun, interesting to change back to 16. Next up is Leech. Yeah, fuck that guy. Black Bolt was the worst card. Based, community perception and win rates and all this stuff, hardly ever played for the longest time. He was actually buffed to 8 power way back. I think they did an October patch where they buffed a lot of the 5 drops, gave them more power, hoping that he would come to life, and he just didn't. He just wasn't a very good card. But then Stature was released. And of course, as you know, Stature, when a card is discarded from your opponent's hand, she costs 1, and then you can play her as a 1/6, and at the time 1/7. So you would get a 7 power card out of Stature, and Black Bolt being a 5/8 was the setup on turn 5 for that turn 6 dump. But my gosh, I feel like he kind of died again for Stature's sins, and the combo still exists, so it's not like too bad. I know some people still play it, but I hardly ever see it nowadays. And I wouldn't want to bring back the full combo because it was strong, it was at the top of the meta. But I think if we were to make a change, leave Stature the way she is, because a 1/6 is still really good. But let's bring back Black Bolt, man. Like, if we can make him viable in another list or something that doesn't rely on Stature, probably will always be handcuffed to her. But it would be neat if you could bring in this one back to 5/8. I feel like he got done dirty on that deal because of Stature. So I think this is pretty warranted. Out of all the changes that I've shown you guys, this is the change that I want the most. All the other ones are just some fun speculation. If they joined the game, fine. If they went back to the original versions, that'd be cool to try out. But Captain Marvel, we had a 4/5 Captain Marvel for such a small window of time. But I feel like it wasn't enough. It wasn't warranted to drop her down to a 4/4. I think they were trying to find a happy place. Silky Smooth was taken off. A few other decks. She was one of the higher win rate cards, admittedly. But it was fun. And I think just like Dr. Doom, how they changed him, but he was still kind of good and they brought him back because he was a fun card that the player base enjoyed. I think we should bring back Captain Marvel. We don't have enough Reddit posts complaining about why Carol didn't move. It's too funny. But for real, this was a fun card to use when she was a 4/5. Being a 4/4, not the worst thing in the world, but a card that is so reliant on its power total to win you the game. Every bit of power is going to really hurt this card. And I think we've seen her kind of just drop off. I don't see any lists really running Captain Marvel anymore. And it's too bad. The synergy with Zebu was really nice and it's still there. But a 3/4 that might move to win you the game isn't so great compared to a 3/5 that might move and win you the game. Sounds a lot more alluring. So they even said for the last week, Captain Marvel has been one of the best performing cards. We're going to cool Carol off for a minute. Let the metagame breathe before evaluating where her happiest home would be if it's not a 4/4. Let me tell you, her happiest home was 4/5. That's where she was performing the best. I think that's where players enjoyed playing her the most. So I hope they make this reverted nerf here, bring her back to a 4/5. I'm just going to go out and speculate and kind of do a little mini prediction that with the new season coming out in November, focused around Captain Marvel, Miss Marvel, Spectrum, all these sorts of things, I think we could see Captain Marvel becoming a 4/5 and they go back and say that her happiest home is a 4/5 and they bring her back. You never know, but that's my speculation and I'd be happy for it. All right, and the last one, and this is a bonus because I really don't know how I feel about this card going back to the way it was, but I do miss AERO. She was a pretty fun card to play, but she did feel really bad to play against when your opponent just basically had checkmate because they can move that one card that you're going to play to a location that you're already winning, and then they win the other two locations. It's kind of rough. There was like some Sandman shenanigans, and then you play AERO, all these sorts of things. So you gotta watch out. But what if we went all the way back, okay? Funny enough, AERO went through a lot of changes. Originally, this card was a 5/6 with the ability to move all enemy cards played this turn to this location, okay? They buffed her, believe it or not, to a 5/7 because she wasn't seeing enough play. And then she took off. I don't know what happened exactly, but players just realized this card is insane. This card is really good. This is winning me a lot of cubes. And she just did really well until about, I think, January it was when they ended up changing her, maybe even December, February, I don't know, one of those months. But they ended up reworking the card so that she was to only move the last card played by your opponent this turn to this location. So it only moves the one card, and they gave her more power to offset the change to her ability. So they made her a 5/8 with that ability, and that is how you know the card today. And she does okay. I know a lot of people say maybe she's a sleeper card. She performs a lot better than most people think. I've tried to play her more often, but I do feel like she gets cut because there's just more synergistic things you can do with your deck. The whole Kingpin shenanigan doesn't always work out, and there's a lot of decks right now, especially with Elsa, Loki, these sorts of things, that are playing so many cards on turn 6 that you can't really do much about it. And funny enough, even if we change her ability to be the way it was, remove all the cards, well, those Loki decks, those Elsa decks are filling the locations and we're probably not going to be able to move all that much anyways. So would it be so bad? I don't know. Maybe, just putting this out here, maybe it'd be a nice little counter to the Red Skull Shuri decks, because I find often they will use Ebony Maw in Taskmaster or Red Skull or whatever else to avoid a counter like this, or I don't know, anything, right? And then maybe if we can move both, we'd be a little bit better off. Maybe this is too toxic. I'm up and down about it. There's some lists that this ability would totally wreck, and there's some lists that this wouldn't do anything to. If she was 6 power, I think it'd be okay. But that's why it's a bonus, because I don't know. I'm up and down about it. You guys gotta let me know in the comments below. Let me know what you think about all these. Maybe there's some other ones, some of your favorite cards that were nerfed that you'd like to see reverted. There's a few that I omitted here for, specific reasons, kind of just because I kind of believe the Balance team and trust them. Things like Galactus. Like, I know Galactus is doing so hot right now. He's been nerfed time after time after time, but I'm like, maybe, dude, maybe you should just stay there. Same with like Leader. He got banged around, and it's like, let's not bring back original Leader because that was really annoying. But again, it's subjective, it's personal, it depends on how you like to play the game. And let me know if there's any other ones that you'd like to see, or maybe even some buffs taken back. Hey, let me know in the comments below. But thank you so much for watching. Like the video, know if you enjoyed this type of content. Subscribe if you're not already subscribed to the channel. And everybody, I will catch you next time.